starting with the rise of hate crimes. It's an ugly aspect of our society, but one that we simply cannot afford to ignore. Recent attacks in El Paso, Pittsburgh, and of course Charlottesville have shaken our country to its core. But while some politicians have yet to call out the significance of this issue, there are many finally starting to come around.
Hate crimes are designed to strike fear not just in one person or the person to whom an act of violence is directed, but toward an entire community, and try to make them feel that they are not a part of the community, that they are not a part of the state. And sometimes that fear cuts across an entire region or an entire state.
And that was Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring. But the issue is a problem nationwide. So tonight, we are focusing on hate crimes in the district. There has been a rise in reported hate crimes in the city, but for some reason, there has been a significant drop in prosecution. So to talk more about this is Frederick M. Lawrence, distinguished lecturer at Georgetown Law and expert in hate crimes. You're the CEO of Phi Beta Kappa. That's as well. Right. Thank you so much for being here. We just really had a great discussion before the show started. Let's start from the very top.
Sure.
What is a hate crime?
Hate crime is a bias-motivated act of violence. Hate crimes are different from what we call parallel crimes, the same crime without the bias-motivated violence, in each of three ways. It affects the individual differently, it affects the whole target community differently, and for the reasons you were just talking about, it really affects the entire society. So you look at something like what happened in Pittsburgh, and then you go to members of the American Jewish community who could not find that synagogue in Pittsburgh on the map, but they still feel like they are victims of that crime. Right? That's a different kind of crime, and that's why it's so important to recognize these as a different kind of crime.
So the numbers in D.C. are pretty remarkable. D.C. has the highest per capita hate crime rate of all or any major city in the country?
Well, that's right. And that may or may not mean that we have the biggest problem with hate crimes, because there's another thing going on here too. We know that there is massive underreporting of hate crimes. So it may well be that our police are doing a particularly good job of investigating this. The disconnect is what's happening with prosecutors, and that there is an under-prosecution of hate crimes, and this is what's caused a lot of concern. It is very, very important for the reasons I was just saying, that when something is actually proven to be a bias-motivated act of violence, that it be identified as that it be prosecuted as that, and that it be punished as that. So we have disconnects at each of those points. We have prosecutors who are saying, well, it might have been a bias-motivated assault, but we're just going to prosecute it as an assault. And we have judges saying, well, there's a penalty for the assault. We're not going to have the bias motivation. The problem is, what does that say to the victim? That says to the victim, you know, that extra harm that you feel, or the other members of the target community, it says we as a society, we as law enforcement, don't recognize that, don't feel that. That's a terribly dangerous thing for us to be doing.
So the Attorney General, Carl Racine, his office here in D.C. says they're beefing up their resources to properly address this, because they identify that it's a problem and that they need to address it. So are we doing enough? Are we trending towards more action when it comes to this?
I hope so. I think this kind of notoriety that it's received, I mean, the very conversation that we're having, a lot of discussion that's gone on in the media, is going to bring greater attention to it. I think it's just human nature. Yeah. Prosecutors know that someone is watching. You know, they represent us. Did you ever think about the fact that a case is always called the people against Smith? It's not Jones against Smith. That's not just for one person. That's for all of us. That case is being brought. You
know, we were starting off our conversation, and I said, you know, D.C. seems like in so many ways such a progressive city. And that we embrace our LGBTQ neighbors and community members, yet you hear some of the personal, hateful and hurtful stories that was highlighted in Washington Post when a young lady was shot because she said her coworker was upset that she was a lesbian. Why the increase? Why is this happening?
Well, there could be several things going on. One is there's a little bit of a disconnect between the district, where I think there is great focus on that. And don't forget, our local law enforcement is the United States Attorney. So that's the federal Department of Justice that's supposed to be bringing these cases. So whether there's adequate focus on it there or not is one issue. Another is, I say, you've got prosecutors who say it's going to be hard to prove the bias motivation. Maybe I'll just take a plea to the assault. But the case that you're referring to, there is no question that case makes as a case of proof of bias motivation. He says to her, why don't you dress like a girl? He clearly picks her out as someone who he perceives of being GLBTQ. Turns out he's right. He stigmatizes her for that, and when that case is not prosecuted as a hate crime, you know what that says to her? It says that extra spirit murdering that you feel, that your partner feels, we don't care about that. That is a terrible message for the law enforcement.
So that's why it's important for victims to share their story, and important for people like you to be at the forefront to talk about this, because it obviously is an issue that we can't afford to ignore.
There's a lot of work left to do, that's for sure.
All right, Frederick Lawrence, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I appreciate your time. Great conversation.
You bet.
Take care.